ICQ Podcast, episode 281, National Radio Centre. Well, hello there to our fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 281st episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported by Bruce Hyman, along with our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M0NRB is joined by Chris at Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, Dan Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa, as well as Frank Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is our visit to the National Radio Centre in Bletchley Park in the UK. Guys, I can't tell you how much it's humbling to see continued donation support from yourselves. In this episode, we'd like to thank Bruce Hyman for continuing the trend, and Bruce, along with our subscription donors on the monthly and annual subscription plans, keeping this show advert-free for you. As always, you appreciate your podcast being advert-free. All you need to do is visit ICQPodcast.com/donate, where anything you send our way is always greatly appreciated. Thank you very much to you all. Got a bit of a PR mention to mention as well. Koos van der Hout, I think I pronounced it right, Koos. Papa Echo 4 Kilo Hotel from Utrecht in the Netherlands contacted me. Let me know about a podcast directory called Radio Republic that he started to use, which he found quite interesting. Now, he wasn't able to get the ICQ podcast on it through the directory and use the RSS link, but Koos advised me of the directory. I was able to follow some links, and we've now got the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast on that platform available through the directory. So, Koos, thank you very much for alerting us to that new podcast directory. There are some options on there where they want you to insert advertising and that sort of thing. Of course, we're not going to switch those on because this is a listener supported show. So I say, but you will be able to easily find the ICQ podcast now on the Radio Public directory. So, Koos, again, thank you very much for that. Okay, so we now join Martin, Chris, Martin, Dan, Ed, and Frank to discuss the latest amateur radio news, including big changes for the ARRL board and France calls for basic licenses. Hope you enjoy, guys.
Hi, Mrs. B here. If you purchase items through Amazon, please enter Amazon via Amazon link on the ICQ Podcast homepage. This costs nothing and will help the ICQ Podcast to grow. 73's Mrs. B.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 281 of the ICQ podcast, and this episode's news roundtable. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Evening, Martin. How are you doing?
Pretty well, Chris. No problems at all, and good to have you back. Seem to spend a lot of time rallies and weekends with you these days. We've been pretty busy.
Absolutely, yeah. It's all good stuff. Yeah.
We also have Mr. Martin Rothwell M0SGL, who will probably try and get me into trouble at most times.
I'm going to do my very, very best, but you can always rely on me to stand in Leslie's absence.
That's fine. No problems at all. We have Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Good evening, guys.
Hi, Dan. Good to have you on board. Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP. Hi, Ed.
Evening, all.
Evening. You sound like a policeman when you do that, Ed. And,
well, after the discussions earlier on that we had.
Yeah.
That's more Martin, I think.
Oh,
or Chris.
Chris. That was Chris. And last but not least, by a long way, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4 FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin and all the guys. Good to be back this time.
Yeah, we missed you the other week, but good to have you back with us. And hopefully we'll have a live discussion tonight. First news story. Big changes ahead in the ARRL board. Now, I'm going to let Dan and Frank lead on this one because it's their side of the pond. However, it looks like you've had quite a big shake-up and, hopefully things are changing for the better. Frank, you ready to go on this one?
Sure. And as I said in our rehearsal, it's like the Star Wars movie. There's a great disturbance in the Force. And I mean that positively. It's difficult in general to unseat an incumbent. And if the ARRL has sort of been situated like that, there's been several incumbents for division directors who are the voting members and representatives on the ARRL board get unseated with some new blood. So some very close elections. And I'm going to punt this over to Dan. He's kind of written about this story, but I think the maybe recent criticisms about transparency and let's do some things different to serve our members are beginning to be heard with some results.
Yeah, that's for sure. So every year here in the U.S., we have 5 division directorships up for election. There's 15 total. So every 3 years, there's an election for each division director. So of the 5 this year, three incumbents were standing for, or 4 incumbents were standing for election. And in the 5th, the Northwest Division, it was the vice director who was running for the director job. Okay, so of those 5, 4 of the incumbents were actually defeated. And the people that won the elections were all directors or candidates that were calling for a more open board and the more membership input and all those kind of things. And I think this really is a big statement to the ARRL board that the members have been unsatisfied.
Yeah, and some of it, the more of a profile you have, I guess, in taking leadership in any organization, the more criticism you're going to get, because you're going to just have some people disagree with you. But I think the most hotly contested one was the one in the Hudson Division, Dan. Long-term director Mike Lysenko, N2YBB, was narrowly defeated by a well-known DXer. She's a big SDR aficionado, Rhea Jaram, N2RJ. And I think that was probably, perhaps not surprising, but one of the most notable ones. In New England, a longtime director, Tom Frenay, K1KI, was defeated by the attorney, Fred Hopgarden. And Fred's probably best known for his very famous book on antenna towers and zoning. And he's been sort of an outspoken person in that regard, very well known. So to me, those were the 2 most hotly contested division directors. And I think there'll be some significant change there.
Right, especially when you consider we have a new CEO now too. So I think it really does. We'll see a lot of new changes at the ARRL.
Yeah, and you pointed this out in your blog post. A fairly well-known, high-profile ham in the Central Division, Valerie Hotsfield, who's on Ham Nation. She's a big contester, and I think people like Gordon West and Bob Howell and a number of others who are on big-time video programs like that. They get known far and wide. And Valerie certainly kind of fits in there, perhaps in the second tier of hams who participate in Ham Nation. And so she narrowly lost to Kermit Carlson, and perhaps she'll run again, who knows. But lots of activity. And I think in the Roanoke Division, Jim Bonner, N2ZZ, he lost to George Hippisley, W2RU. So who knows in the next round of division directors, who knows who's going to run. I'm in the Delta Division, and another high-profile ham occupies that seat. And he knows that there's at least one person who's not going to run against him, and that's yours truly, because I Dave Norris that I just couldn't deal with the travel that's required of the folks who do that.
Well, I think the current election results will encourage other people to run too, and I think that'll be a good thing.
It will, and really to the extent that while it has gotten fairly heated and sometimes contentious out in social media, important issues like that, have to be aired out, or they just fester and get worse, and you have people who just withdraw altogether. So I think the vetting of this through voting and getting some new people in, and they'll have to perform, or someone will challenge them. So I think it's a good process. If we can just sort of keep it as constructive as it can be, and I hope, as you pointed out and written about, Dan, I hope our new CEO Bickle will certainly ride herd on it, because we have to face it. Dave Sumner was CEO since barnacles were on the ship in the Boston Harbor, it seemed like. And who knows, we may never have another CEO that is there that long at ARRL. But Mr. Bickle, is the new CEO, and I think he's got his work cut out for him, but he's got the capability, it seems, from his resume, and he's about that business. So if he can ride herd on that, presidents will get elected and reelected and term out, but that CEO position, working with the directors, is just critical. So I'm somewhat optimistic, at least guardedly optimistic, that as a life member of ARRL, we're going to move forward and make some kind of progress.
Well,
I agree.
Yeah, and I actually think, looking at the numbers, there weren't that big a number difference between the person that won and the person that didn't. However, you got to realise there's a lot of work to do some of these roles, and I think with today's modern media and the way things happen a lot quicker, we've got to embrace new technology, because we have new people come into the hobby that expect things to happen instantly. I don't know what you think. The guys in the UK, Chris, do you want to talk on this one?
Obviously, I don't know an awful lot about the politics, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a democratic. These societies are democratic, and the elections are held. And if people don't feel that their voice is being heard, then people can be voted out. But like you say, looking at the results here, there wasn't. I don't think there was a huge turnout, but it was quite close. But I think, as Dan was saying, the incumbents, which typically have an advantage because people know who they are, didn't necessarily come through. So we'll see politically something's going on there, but it's not something I know an awful lot about, really.
All right. So same with us. Morning. We've left you till last.
No, that's fine.
Go on, throw that spanner in the work.
I probably don't have very much to add on this. I mean, it's not something I particularly have been following, but changes like this, these big changes, there's obviously reason that these changes are happening. Let's hope it's for the good. I know that for a long time our national body was seen by some as a bit of a boys' club. Hopefully this, I don't know whether the ARRL had people had similar feelings towards it, but hopefully this is less of an old boys' club, more of an organisation for the people going forwards.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think that's the way a lot of the national societies are going now. They're becoming far more open and listening far more to the members.
Which is the right way to go about it.
Yeah.
You're there for people. People pay to belong to your organisation. You need to be there to support them. Otherwise, what are they paying you for?
Correct. So that's good. Well, our next news story, Green Key Night, is happening. Now, I thought this would be a good one because I saw Key and thought Dan will get all excited because it's Morse keys. Then I read further on and they're talking about a RTTY contest and old-fashioned teleprinters and VT100 terminals. And effectively, Frank, Dan and I pretty much got off into a nostalgia on this, but I kind of like it. What do you think, Dan?
Oh, yeah, I think this will be a lot of fun. It almost makes me wish I had a old teleprinter like that.
You heard of eBay?
Yeah, I know, but I couldn't afford the shipping.
Well, there is actually one, isn't there, on HMS Belfast, is the Creed printer on there, which I made the mistake of once of looking at the paper and then trying to figure out how to get the paper tape to go back in was like a rest of the day's job, really. It was,
that was so funny.
It was not. In fact, I think in the end, I just kind of put it back as best I could and let somebody else deal with it later.
Pretended you haven't touched it.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But no, in fairness, there's some interesting stuff. I mean, the guys are obviously using a very old piece of equipment, which is nice to know that some of this older gear actually works, and putting it on the air was quite fun. I mean, they're talking about VT100 terminals, which are the old digital terminals that went on the VAX mini computers. They're talking about teletype devices. They're talking about pre-Windows computers. Now, come on, you must have used one of those, mustn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that I grew up in the age where a VAX was a vacuum cleaner. I have a feeling we did do something on a VAX when I was at college, so that would have been like 97, and we sort of had this mainframe appreciation thing, but I don't remember too much about it or what it could do. I think it was, it could do very, very basic word processing, and I think that was it. But I like this whole idea of pressing old kit back into use. It's sort of, to some extent, it is recycling. Recycling's good. Although especially if you're recycling and you've managed to get hold of it for free. Although I wonder if that cost is then immediately set off by the amount of power that it's probably using. When you switch it on, like all of your neighbours' street lights dim and you phone the local hospital to get them to put their emergency generators on. But, we're amateurs. We like free, cheap stuff. Pressing old kit back into service is good. I've got a modem I can't bring myself to throw away, but I'm never going to use it again. But it's a piece of history.
No, I'm one of those. I threw mine away. I was in my garage. I threw it away eventually when I moved house. Yeah, we had some VAX actually at my university. My very first job in IT was working on a system that was based on dumb terminals, so it's not that long ago that this sort of thing was being used.
Guys, I back in 1983, I worked with a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Had a commercial system called Delphi. They were sort of the Avis rental car of that. The Source, CompuServe, and Delphi. And they built 3 networks available in 60 countries using packet switch carriers. And I can remember like it was yesterday signing in to a 6-pack of DEC VAXs all in a ring network. And it was always greet me with, I see you are the wizard. And I've probably never gotten over that. That probably went to my head, Chris, and I still remember being the wizard. And a DEC LA writer, having one of those with the green and white box of paper under it, so it would print out your what we later became emails through BitNet. Oh, it was heavy times, and now we look at that and we have in our pockets far more computing power. But there's a certain nostalgia and romantic set of feelings that if you grew up in that era or had something to do with it, it's very difficult to let go. Very much like the old Tektronix oscilloscopes with the 555 that had 100 vacuum tubes in it. And I've got a friend who has about 50 of those. And those are only the ones that his XYL knows about. He has a private storage unit where he has some of the others. So
does she know about the storage unit?
She doesn't, because she doesn't listen to amateur radio.
Well, that's good. There is this part of me though that this whole thing. Do you remember the film War Games? I still want the Whopper to have been real. Someone to have that. I just want that to be real.
I remember seeing a program on YouTube, I think it was, about the Whopper. It was all made out of paper mache and LEDs and things.
Well, I want that to be a real mainstream.
And the noise, apparently, that noise it makes, that humming sound as well, was brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah.
Say, here's a little bit of ham radio trivia. So they say in this story, please know brag tapes, right? Well, what a brag tape is, if you're an RTTY operator, is a macro that you send, what your equipment you have and all that. But the original origin of that term comes from the paper tape that the RTTY operators used to feed into their teletypes. So you'd have all that information on a piece of paper tape, you'd feed it in and automatically send that instead of having to type it in by hand. So that's a little bit of ham radio trivia there.
Yeah,
paper tape was the original macro.
Yeah, we got off onto that, didn't we, earlier about paper tape and all the things that people did with paper tapes. That was quite good. Ed, you've been very quiet, and I probably forgot to bring you in on the last story. I apologise.
That's okay, Martin. The last story I had no comments on anyway because it's the other side of the pond. Yeah, this one, I remember with my brother actually having in our shed, which was also our Radio Shack, a proper old-fashioned radio teleprinter, and we used to send across Yorkshire or across parts of Yorkshire on 2 meters RTTY. I think it would have been feeding an AM transmitter back in those days, so that would be middle of the 70s to late 70s, and indeed prepare the tape first, because otherwise you've got to type quickly and not make any mistakes. Getting the timing right on the pieces that move around inside the physical teleprinter was a nightmare getting it right with timing lights and all kinds of different things to get it spot on. Because if you weren't sending at 45.5 boards, or was that the right number? I think it was
45.45.
Thank you. You see, 45.5 won't work. 45.45 board, the guy at the other end wouldn't be able to receive it. So, yeah, good times. But my goodness, for them things heavy and noisy.
It smelled like oil.
Yeah, absolutely burning oil sometimes.
Yeah.
Those were the days, guys.
I think there's a big danger.
This
podcast could just become an episode purely about old computer equipment if we're not careful. But
the Nostalgia Hour on ICQ.
Absolutely,
podcast.
Yes.
Available only now on reel-to-reel tape.
Don't stop on reel-to-reel
punch tape.
Interblock gaps and all that sort of thing. Vacuum tubes. Yeah, that's all going to be coming up soon.
Well, that shows our age, but at least we can understand what this is all about. And I quite like this. It's going to happen soon. It's going to be on the air, all this old equipment. So look out for it. 1st of January, 2019.
New Year's Eve night.
Yeah. New Year's Day.
Well, over there maybe. Here it's New Year's Eve night.
Well,
throughout New Year's Day.
Yeah.
It starts here New Year's Eve.
Yeah. So New Year's Eve for you, Dan. New Year's Day for us. But no, it'd be fun. I think it could be worth listening out for these guys, and they're just doing something a bit different. And I know we got flash stuff that can probably do it equally better, but it's nice to fire up some of the old gear and just make sure it works. So
just to follow on that one. So I know we went to the National Computing Museum in Bletchley Park a while ago, didn't we? Well as the Bletchley Park Museum. I know they're obviously very big into resurrecting old, very old equipment and making it work and demonstrating it. And I do know that they do their thing with the Enigma. They send a message, don't they, and try to decode it at Bletchley Park, which is using the old equipment, which is quite fascinating, really.
Yeah. Well, I'm not suggesting I'm going to do this because it hasn't run for years, but I have an Apple II EURAO with a VT100 emulator.
Yeah.
Whoa.
That sounds like a project for a Monday night.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna duck out on that one, but I don't think we'll do that. But moving on. In France, the URC, which is the French Union of Radio Clubs, is calling for a basic amateur radio license. And this is something that Edmund was telling us about some time ago, that the French did away, we believe, in 2012. So, Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, okay, well, I think the text says it all, that they're trying to, this group, we're not even sure that it's actually the National Radio Society or whether it's just a group of amateurs, are trying to get what we might call the foundation license implemented again to get a 3-level structure of licenses in France, which we discussed before starting, to say that, each country is different. We often think of, 3 levels that make sense, an entry level, a middle level, and a full level, but certain countries only have 1 or 2 levels. So in this case, France has gone back to having 2 levels, but they want to add back in a lower level one. And what's interesting is, I believe, if I've read this correctly, they want it to be a VHF and UHF only one, which would be good in many ways to get activity back on 2 meters and 77s.
Yeah, I agree with you that, and certainly I think Edmund would be in his glory because he speaks fluent French, and VHF from where he is no problems into France. So that would be a good one. Mine, we should be able to work them though on a good day, shouldn't we?
On a good day, VHF, UHF, yeah. I mean, a part of me says, if they had this equivalent of a basic license before, what happened to the people that had those licenses? Did they suddenly lose their licenses, or did they get an automatic upgrade? Just curious on that. Well, I guess wanting to bring in VHF, UHF, it's got to be a good thing. It's a good way of people getting the bug, specifically if they've been playing with the likes of network radio and things like that. And I know in the UK, I don't know if similar organisations exist in France, but I know we have a voluntary ambulance service where volunteers get together and called St John's Ambulance. And I think the Red Cross have a similar sort of thing. But I know that they get their volunteers, a lot of them, they get them to do our foundation license so they can talk to the likes of Raynet and things for comms on, events and things like that. So if they have a similar sort of thing in France, I guess this is another easy way of getting people onto the air. But mainly, if you can get on the air with it and people's got the bug, it's an easy way in, then why not?
Well, I think from my perspective, I know, Martin, you're the same, Martin Rothwell, that we both went through the same 3-tier system, similar to what they got in the States with the technician and the general and the extra class, and also we've got the foundation, the intermediate, and the full license. I probably wouldn't have ever got an amateur license if it wasn't for that system. I don't know what your thoughts on that, Martin, but certainly in my case, I don't think I would have gone straight to the.
No, I'm probably the same. When you look at the RRAE. And having looked at some of the course material, I was lost before. Maybe if I'd have sat through a course, if there was someone near me doing the course, explaining it a bit at a time, I might have got it. But I think having done the foundation here, use the radio as a foundation license holder. And bear in mind, I already had background with CB and stuff. That 1 year to get to the intermediate, I needed. I don't think I could have gone straight to intermediate after foundation. I think I'd have struggled. And the same by going to advanced.
And look at someone like poor old Colin M6BOY, who we joke about getting his moving up the levels, but in Ireland they've only got the full license. They don't have what we have, which is at 3 tiers, and I think that's a big jump.
And that's holding back.
Yeah. So I think if they had that in Ireland, if they had that 3-tier system in Ireland, I think by now Colin would have had his full license.
Yeah.
And Ed and the other guys, Dan and Frank. No, you have different systems in different parts of the world. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, one thing, a general comment, I like these kinds of actions that facilitate communication across countries where it makes sense. Maybe some language differences, but hey, there's motivation to learn another language, and it reduces interference. So I really like the general thrust of what I'm hearing. And I know Ed is, having moved in different places, different countries, and even continents, and has a good feel for some of these things in Europe, too. But I agree with you. We don't do delayed gratification very well in many of these things. So, as in Ireland, if you had to study, and then, after a while, you might be proficient to get the license. People tend not to stay with it, not that some wouldn't, but people tend not to stay with it. So having these gradations, I think, is a very, very good facilitating thing. Now, Dan and I have certainly talked about training, and I'll ring off here and let him pick it up. The problem we have in the States, we have this gargantuan growth in technician, the beginning license, and many of the old timers complain, they're just glorified CBers, or they're techies, shack in the box or shack on the belt, etc. But the clubs in the United States have the burden of continuing to elmer and educate, and perhaps our clubs are not doing maybe what they could do. And with that note, I'll kind of hand it off to Dan, because he and I have talked about this at length before.
Well, I think the having a novice license is a good thing, and there's a lot of criticism here in the U.S. that the technician really is too advanced, right? We're requiring too much of to even get a technician class license. So what can I say? My thought is, and I've said this before, we never seem to tire in the ham radio community about talking about licensing and classes and privileges and all that stuff. And, in a way, this is just like another one of those things.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with you guys that getting people into our hobby is an important thing. Even if we have a very beginner's license, getting people into the hobby takes the mystique away from us being sort of a very elitist bunch, because I think the general public partly believe we still do Morse and we won't talk to them. And I think getting them into the hobby is a very good thing. And on the Colin front, I am 99.9% sure if he was still living in the UK, he'd be a full licensee, because he would have the support network around him. And although Skype is good, he's on his own in many ways in Ireland, and work is quite heavy that often stop stops him from getting to do other things. But I think if he'd have been in the UK, I think we'd have roughed him up sufficiently that he'd have got it by now. But that's another story. So, yeah, nice to see the French are talking about this. Let's see if it comes to fruition. Moving on, Australia. The Labour Party is going to commit $2 million to resurrect the ABC Shortwave Radio if they're re-elected. And as I say, they shut down ABC Radio, and it's been a bit of a problem out there in the Northern Territories especially, hasn't it, Ed?
Yeah, they haven't shut down ABC Radio because this report was actually on ABC Radio. They shut down the shortwave stations in the north of Australia, in Northern Territory and Northern Queensland. This happened about 2 years ago. It was a prime example of the accountant coming along and saying it's costing too much. We don't want to do this. We can save money. Look, they can get it on the internet. They kind of forgot about a lot of people and companies that are located well away from any cell towers. So there's no cell tower to get the internet. The only way they can get it is through a satellite phone. And in fact, there's been a lot of pressure on the government, and it's been a political issue now for the last year or so, from not just from individuals, but from companies as well, saying this was a bad move. And yeah, let's hope this isn't just an election promise from the Labour Party, but they are saying if they get back in, if they get elected this time around, and I'm not even sure when the election is, I think it's next year sometime, that one of the things they're definitely going to do is to allocate from the budget 2 million Aussie dollars, because that's what they're saying it costs, or what they've saved, to the ABC for the job just to put the shortwave stations back on the air. I hope they haven't disassembled all the transmitters and antennas and things, because if they have, it's going to cost them a lot more than that.
Yeah, certainly would. Certainly would, mate. Okay, Dan, do you any thoughts on this? I know it's not on your territory, neither is it on mine, but interesting, I'd say.
Well, yeah, so you kind of piqued my interest with this, and what I did was I Googled population densities, and especially compared to Australia to the U.S., and it's quite amazing. I mean, the population density of Australia is much, much less than the U.S., so I can see where they would need this shortwave service.
Well, I can remember being a kid and seeing, and this may or may not be the case now, but certainly because of the remoteness of a lot of places in Australia, and Ed, you may know more about this. Things like the flying doctor service you would call in using your radio, or kids would be schooled over the radio. They'd have either a shortwave, or I'm actually not sure which band they were on, but I remember seeing films when I was a child. Is that still the case, Ed? Do you know?
No, the schooling at least. The doctors, flying doctor, yes, that service still exists and can be called via radio or by telephone or by whatever. But the schools all moved over to internet. So they put in satellite internet connections, data connections into schools or local community places where the children then have to go, rather than going from home. Now, that being said, I'm not sure. I guess they must use satellite phones for the few very outback stations where it might take them a day to get to a town, and the children still need to learn. But it's basically all done in a similar way, the same way, remote learning. Australia's had remote learning now probably for 50 or 60 years, where it's something new in other places. And yeah, the radio, the HF radio then was, I think it was around 5 megs actually. But anyway, HF radio then was very important. But they've moved over to satellite internet to provide that capability now. But it's just things like broadcast messages. Hey, there's a flood or a tornado coming through or something. Having the shortwave radio there and getting just the daily news and this sort of thing, that being taken away from a whole community without really considering the community properly was an error. It was a big error, and that might be one of the things that the current government loses their seats for.
Right. That sounds interesting. Martin, you're a broadcaster.
Yep.
Your thoughts?
So, $2 million to resurrect ABC Shortwave Radio if elected. Yeah, Ed mentioned election. Hope it isn't an election promise. Yeah, we've had a lot of those in the UK recently, so I know where you're coming from with that. And as a responsible broadcaster, we should say that other political parties are available. That aside, I never got why they turn it off. Yes, absolutely right. It's an accountant that's made an uninformed decision. They've just looked at some numbers on a graph and went, yeah, we'll switch this off. And the one point I was going to make is the one that Ed made. How much kit has already been dismantled? Okay, yeah, you can plug a transmitter back in, so to speak. But what about the towers? It's shortwave. It's not just a case of sticking a folded dipole up on a high point. You've got to get the signal in there. Okay, you can get the signal in via a satellite. You've still got to get your aerial up. You've got to run the transmitters. I fail to see who actually made the decision to turn it off. Was this ABC that made the decision to turn it off? Or was this a government saying, you may turn it off? Because in the UK, your regulator, you have strict rules that say you have to provide the service on these frequencies. You can hand your license back and say, I'm not interested in providing the service. But, for example, when you apply for a license in the UK, you are looked favourably upon, and your license is more favourable if you put yourself on DAB. If you are on DAB and you pull off DAB and say, actually, no, it's not for us, as some broadcasters in the UK have, it is frowned upon. And then people will come and they'll be looking at you, and actually you're in breach of your license because you're not on DAB. Who made that decision to come off of shortwave I'm not saying DAB's a good idea in Australia, but who made the decision to come off of shortwave in Australia?
It was generated from the government that they said you need to cut your budget. The
Correct.
ABC then went away and said, okay, their accountants looked at it and went, this is what we can do.
Right.
What they maybe should have been doing was cutting services elsewhere, where politically it would be more people affected, and therefore they would be told, oh, no, you can't do that, better give you the money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that game again, budget game.
So is ABC funded like the BBC is, where
Yes.
we have to pay a license fee?
It's the government-owned broadcaster.
Right, okay. So, I get why they've done it, but yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Switch it back on. If it's still there, it's not a big job for you.
Something interesting, a private company in northern Queensland has already started putting his own shortwave transmitters in place to put the coverage back anyway.
Yeah.
So
I remember something about this.
They maybe the ABC can rent time on his stations.
Is there benefit? I mean, presumably ABC goes out via satellite, and it's got to be available to some extent via satellite to feed other transmitters across the country. But is there benefit to people in these small towns? Well, I don't know how far apart they are. Setting up, one person gets a satellite receiver and an FM transmitter, whether you're covering a small town of 15 or 20 people, or a slightly bigger town of 1,000, 2,000 people, whatever, and then setting up effectively a rebroadcast station. I mean, would that not be another alternative?
Problem with that is, unless it's a shortwave station, not an FM station, you've got people travelling each day for their work, transporting stuff around, maybe 600 or 700 kilometres. And you're talking big.
I'm thinking about to feed the town that you live in. You can feed it with a 3-metre FM transmitter.
Agreed. No, it's not the towns so much. It's the people that are living out.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
People living out in the outback. People working in the mines. All the very, very remote stuff, and also the Aborigine groups and villages as well.
Okay.
Right. Frank, this is something that I thought you might be interested in, because Dan said something about statistics, and I know you're a very statistical man and that of where people live and that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and of course I remember very vividly. I during college I ran a motel from 10 at night till 6 in the morning, and so I used to listen to the ABC with their English broadcast to North America at 6 in the morning, and vividly remember that. And I want to focus on that for a minute. The following logic gets short shrift today, and many countries have cut international services. But we've all discussed what ABC shortwave can do within Australia. But there's also a benefit to representing Australia to the rest of the world, particularly in the Pacific Rim, where you have nations that have censored internet coverage. And very often, particularly in China and particularly in Malaysia and some others, when you can be tortured for having a religious tract, the Bible, etc., they don't really know what you've been listening to on the radio. They might know what you've been trying to look at on a PC or something. So shortwave radio still has some viability from my mind's eye for international relations. So I think there would be some benefit for the shortwave service coming back on, in addition to what's been said for the domestic benefit, but for the international relations benefit.
Yeah, actually, those transmitters in the north of Australia did also cover up towards Indonesia and the islands all around there, so they all lost their shortwave at the same time. The rest of the country, it's I don't think they've stopped all shortwave broadcasting. It was mainly Northern Territories and far north Queensland that was hit by this close down of the stations. But again, those transmitters also covered other nations to the north of Australia.
Right. So that sounds... So it will be actually a very good thing if it turns out to happen and not an election promise as we've suggested on this one. So I think we're all in agreement. If it comes back on, it'll be a very, very good thing. Moving on, we're about to get a geostationary satellite. We are amateurs. We've normally had low orbit satellites. Now we're just about ready to get a geostationary one, aren't we, Ed?
Yep, on November the 15th, Howell 2 satellite was launched from Cape Canaveral, I believe, down in Florida, by SpaceX. And it is carrying some communications repeating equipment for the Qatari satellite company, but it's also carrying a couple of amateur radio transponders. And the key thing about this is the first ever amateur radio satellite that will go into a geostationary orbit. What's special about geostationary? It means it's in the same place in the sky 24/7, 365 days a year, like your TV satellite, your TV satellites are. And also, we were discussing before this, would you say 340 kilometers out from the Earth, so it's a long, long way out there. So although the satellite is already in orbit, it's probably going to be a month or two before it gets into its final position. And then after that, there's also going to be a time where obviously the main payload is going to get tested out first before the amateur stuff is turned on. What was very nice angle on this story is this was all possible through the work of AMSAT Germany, AMSAT DL, and the Qatari satellite company, where the AMSAT DL people actually brought their knowledge of satellite design to help them build their and design their commercial part of the satellite. And in exchange, if you like, they got space for a couple of boards for the amateurs to go on the same payload and actually on the same satellite. So nice to see co-working between industry and amateur radio, that very high level, in other words, that very highly qualified level. And at the same time, this is going to be quite a thing for the amateurs. It's not just like an FM repeater. It's not just one channel. It's there's 200 kilohertz wide or something. And there's actually a webcam up there on it as well, and data and various things. But the thing of interest will be the non-reversing transponder. It's going to be a bit more difficult to get to than the normal satellites because it uses 2,400 megahertz up and 10 gigs down. So you'll need a dish. But once you get that dish there and your transverter for any mode, so FM or AM or CW or sideband or digital modes, you know, once you've got the dish set, it stays where it is, and you've effectively got then a 24-hour amateur band that is covering about half of the Earth's surface. So from Brazil in the west to Thailand in the east. The reason it's covering that and not North America is because of the commercial payload that's on there, which is for communications between Africa, Europe, and India. So all in all, quite something. This is important in history. That's how important this is.
Yeah, that sounds good. Martin, you and I dabble a little bit with satellites, but this is a bit more complicated than us going outside with a Yagi. So
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've got to ask the question. I looked at this, and don't get me wrong, I'm very excited about it. It's really interesting to see 2.4 gigs up and 10.45 gigs down. Hang on, 2.4 gigs? Really? You thought that through? My 2.4 gigs barely, my Wi-Fi in my house barely reaches the end of the garden. I'm kind of wondering how much power and how big a dish you're going to need to hit it at 2.4 gigs, especially as it's 22,000 miles away. Although I'm interested to see it. I do wonder what the take-up will be for it, how many people will actually use it, considering it is, this is not off the shelf. It's not like you can just buy an ARRL antenna or, an equivalent, 2 meter 70 Yagi and point it in the sky. You've got to do quite a lot more. You've got to invest in a transverter and a dish to do this sort of thing. I'm just wondering the decisions behind why 2.4 gigs. Maybe that is just, if you're going on someone else's satellite, you've got to be microwave. Maybe there is no room to put, a 2 meter antenna on the outside of the bird. But I don't know.
I think that's very likely, actually, because they'll only have restricted space available. I mean, they're the stowaways, or the legal stowaways, if you like. So, I think it's partially the antenna. Plus, of course, I haven't got the full details of this, and probably need to do some more research, but perhaps they're having a gain antenna on 2.4 and 10 gigs. And, of course, to put a gain antenna on 2 meters or 70 sems, it'd be enormous.
But how long before someone tries to fire his Wi-Fi signal at it to see if he can pick up his Wi-Fi in the next town?
Well, if he spent whatever number of thousands of dollars, D-marks, euros, or whatever to pay for his transverter, then,
Just put a big amplifier on the back of your broadband box.
I mean, ultimately, we're amateurs, aren't we? I mean, people will do this.
Yeah.
There's some massive benefits to doing this. You can communicate all around, like you were saying, Ed, half the planet can be accessed from a satellite. Think about when people are doing EME, for example, at any one time. That requires quite a lot of specialist kit. Yeah. So I think people will do this. I think the benefits are there. I think there's a big reward if you can get this thing. If you can work through the satellite, I think there's a big payoff in that. You've only have to have somebody else and on our half the planet doing it as well, and you can talk to somebody, and it could be somebody thousands and thousands of miles away. I was looking up. It's 35,000 kilometers, almost 36,000 kilometers out beyond space's geostationary orbit. So it's a very, very long way away. I think you were saying, Ed, earlier that it's on its way there. It's not there yet. I think it takes a while, doesn't it, to actually get as far out?
Yeah, it's in orbit around the Earth at the moment, but I think they're saying about 2 months before it will be in its final position. Yeah. So they have to manoeuvre it there, and of course they've got to watch out for all the other satellites up there.
Yeah, and these things cost, in the billions, I think, to actually get it, not only build it but also launch it. It's not a cheap hobby, shall we say. So I think we're very lucky to actually have something to piggyback on to get this thing out there. But I think it's a phenomenal achievement, and I think once it's out there and working, it's going to be a real benefit and resource. I was actually looking at the website for the company, and this has got a 15-year lifetime, so plenty of time for us guys to try and use it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that people have said it would be useful for emergency communications as well, which would suggest that you don't need to have that much power to get to it. But yeah, we'll see when it's actually up there, when it's in place and turned on. But as I said, it'll be probably three months before any amateur can operate through it, because the first thing they'll do is make sure that the commercial payload is all working correctly before they turn on the amateur stuff. Yeah. Which is reasonable.
Yeah,
and without this joint working between the AMSAT Germany and the Cathay satellite company, there is no way that we could have afforded to put something like this up.
Yeah.
No, it is in the billions. I remember going to a presentation a few years ago now, a company called Inmarsat, who are quite one of the largest companies of their type that do this sort of thing, and they provide communications for aviation and maritime, as well as things like news media, sending back reports and things. And they've got a whole bunch of satellites up there, but they literally cost billions of dollars to build and launch, and they need to make their money back, basically. So we're very, very lucky to have this opportunity to do this as an amateur community. Well,
it's all very interesting. Frank, this is not something you're going to be able to use, this particular one, but have any interest on the technology?
Oh, you bet. While the others have been sharing their views on it, I've been looking at the websites, and it's a template. Very often these things don't come out all at once. There's usually a linear fashion, and when one gets up and the thing works, or maybe works good in this way but not that way, you sort of build on that. And I'm confident that there'll be one that will cover the U.S. one way or the other. The U.S. is investing in hardened emergency communications. Homeland Security led a contract with the contract winner AT&T for something called FirstNet. And a local ham friend of mine is a network engineer with AT&T over 4 states, and he's part of the FirstNet team. And while he can't tell me all the details, with a wink and a nod and a raised eyebrow, you can get a sense of where that's going. And that was billion plus, I forget the exact number. So to the extent that the Qatar satellite companies, SL2, works as they're proposing, even though it doesn't cover the U.S., that is good fodder for stimulating a backup to our FirstNet using satellite communications. And again, 2 of the universities who are participating in this are U.S., or 3 of them actually. Vanderbilt and Penn State have experiments on board, and Virginia Tech had contributed some equipment. So U.S. universities are already players in this satellite launch. So I'm optimistic that we'll be playing in this realm before too long, I hope.
Yeah, I think you will. And I know, Dan, you were talking earlier that you saw some documentation that people in the States are looking into this sort of thing. And I think it'd be really great if we've got this satellite up that covers one half or 1/3 of the planet, and you guys have one that covers the whole of the US. Wouldn't it be great if you could interlink the satellites together, so you could go up on one satellite through and come down on the other? What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, 3 years ago, there was a talk about a U.S. group setting up a geostationary satellite. And in fact, I wrote about it on my blog. And they, at the time, they were hopefully only projecting that it would have been launched in 2017. Well, obviously that didn't happen. So I'm going to do a little digging and see what happened to that project.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it happens. And as I say, it'd be nice if you could interlink the satellites as well, like your cam repeaters in the UK or on the ground.
What if you can get into a satellite with Echolink? I wonder if you could do that with this.
Martin, how about cross-banding? The idea of the linking being done on the ground is not out of the realm of possibility.
That's true. So, I think it's a watch this space. I think it'll be interesting. I think it's going to be quite specialised, and I don't think that you will get a lot of Africa is third world countries, so I don't think you're going to get a lot of satellite communications from amateurs in those countries. You'll probably get a few de-expeditions go there, which...
Martin, South Africa.
Yeah.
Very active amateur radio.
Yeah, South Africa is, but lots of Africa is also third world, so that's why I wasn't thinking of South Africa as being third world, but it's interesting. Right, our last news story, a bit of fun. Just a bit of fun. Santa's Radio Club special event. And you might have wondered what's happening in the Arctic Circle this year. Well, Santa's Radio Club is active from the 1st to the 8th of December. And OH9S is going to be on. Now, if you think about it, and we're mentioning Christmas, it ain't that far away, because when this show releases on Sunday, it's exactly 1 month to Christmas Day, because it goes out on the 25th.
Don't say that.
Well, I'm sorry, Budgie, but over to you. You can go first on this one.
Oh dear, I haven't even thought about Christmas yet. It's still November. I'm refusing to do anything. Although 1st of December, I will be putting my Christmas lights up just to compete with those valves and things in that antique equipment that's being thrown back into use. I like it. I do. I mean, I'm curious by this. I'm curious as to whether this is, is Santa going to be online, for kids, the kids of hams to be able to call into and say hi. Or is this just a club from that kind of area? I don't know, but looks like they're going to be active 80 to 6 meters, including the popular FT8 digital mode. So why not give it a shout? They say they come from the Arctic Circle. Is there a lot of salt water there? Is that a good ground plane for that? Be interesting. But no, another special event. It's a nice call sign to get into your log.
It is, and we're all big kids. We're all big kids.
Oh, of course we are. Yeah.
How are we, Dan?
Yeah, I have one comment about this. Ho, ho, ho.
Dear.
You enjoy
now,
yourself.
Dan, we discussed this in the pre-show.
I know. I'm sorry. Here I had another thought just now. Maybe we could get the ARRL to declare this a separate DXCC entity.
Yeah,
Santa Land.
There you go.
Yeah, go for it, Frank.
Oh, yes, and I would make a figgy pudding if they do that.
Well, you do realise they're not coming from Finland, of course. It's actually Lapland,
Right.
which is in the very, very north of.
I think isn't Lapland go across?
That is actually a separate DXCC entity, isn't it? Should be.
I thought Lapland was an area that covered a number of countries at the top of sort of Norway and Finland and other Nordic regions, isn't it?
Well, I'd have to look at the map, but
I'm not sure now.
Well, that's why it's OH9, of course. 9 is Lapland.
Ah, okay.
Well,
they're in Kittilä, wherever that is.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah.
No, it isn't.
Well, just a bit of fun to finish off with. A bit of fun. It'll be on the air from the 1st to the 8th of December.
I wonder if we aeronautical mobile from the sled.
There you go.
Oh, that's
There we
true.
go.
Think of the signal he gets.
Yeah.
QSB's a bit of a problem when the reindeer get in the way.
Yeah.
When you fly through the northern lights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want Aurora. Oh dear.
Ed, you just use a phasing harness for the antlers and you're good.
Yeah.
What have we started?
I think we're digressing in too much fun, boys. Too much fun. Okay.
You asked for it, Bart.
You started it.
I did.
We did warn you that you weren't going to be controlled today. Let off your leash.
That's true. That's true. But it's fun. It's fun. A little bit of fun to end up on. And
Okay.
That concludes our news stories. Let's just quickly go around the table and see what you guys have been up to radio-wise since the last time we were here. Dan, do you want to go first?
Sure. My latest project is I'm trying to get make my station remotely controllable. So I bought a automatic tuner, and they didn't have the cable that connects the tuner to my ICOM in stock. So I said, well, okay, I'll make my own. Well, by the time I got all the parts and actually made the cable, I could have waited for it. But now I'm having some trouble with it. So it tunes okay. I hit the tune button on the IC7300 and goes through its gyrations and tunes fine. But when I increase the power to send out 100 watts, the tuner goes crazy. So I don't know what's going on there. I'm going to have to troubleshoot that. So I think some ferrite chokes might be in order here.
Dan, is that an MFJ?
No.
Okay.
I don't buy MFJ stuff.
Okay, I've seen a similar problem to that with an MFJ. I might have been able to help you offline, but okay, then it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, don't you upset Frank's best buddy.
No problem. No problem with MFJ. I got the thing sorted. It was a cabling problem, and the cable that I built.
I will say that they do have a forthcoming new remote control box. I was asked to be a beta tester of it, and I've not been able to do so yet. But Howard Nurse has one. So if what you put together, Dan, doesn't work, you might want to take a look at that.
Who knows?
Because I know it works for the 7300, because that's why they asked me to test it.
If they want any more testers, I'd be happy to test it for the 7600.
I will make a note of that.
7600 or 7610?
7600.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm also in the 7300 club. So.
Yeah, that sounds good. Martin, what have you been up to apart from a lot of 3 meters?
A lot of 3 meters, a lot of medium wave. Yeah, some satellite work, but again, that's to do with the 3 meters of medium wave. I was actually one of the things that your feature inspired me. Actually, remote control. It's one of those things that's stuck in my mind. I haven't done anything about it yet, but it is something that has sort of been coming to the forefront of my mind recently. Not as much as I normally would have done. I've had a problem with my Signalink USB sound card recently. I was using to some extent using the sound card built into the 7600, but it's got some weird configuration. Whereas MMSSTV doesn't seem to want to key up the radio it will receive, but it won't key the radio up. And there's just some configuration I couldn't get my head around. The Signalink that I've had for years just worked. It failed recently, so I took it all apart, cleaned it all out, put it all back together again, and it seems to be working. So I've been having a bit of fun with that, with SSTV, and playing with a little bit of Whisper as well. Had a few hits around Europe and a couple into North America yesterday on 30 meters, I think it was. So had a bit of fun with that. A little bit of fun with Fusion and D-Star. A couple of people have been emailing me saying, hey, I can't hit the repeater. What am I doing wrong? You're talking to it in FM, sir. You need to press the digital voice mode. Other than that, that's pretty much it from me from a radio point of view. Not a lot else going on.
All right. Well, so you have been busy recently. Ed, what have you been up to? Lots of SOTA, or is it too cold now?
I did a couple of SOTA activations since last time, and related to a couple of projects I've been working on. And one of the projects was to actually use the antenna that I did a review on 4 weeks ago, the Communica HF Pro 2, because I wanted to use it on a tripod rather than having to have it on a car roof, so I want to be able to use it portable. And indeed, I actually managed to get that all working, so that it works just as well on top of a Summit on a little camera tripod, and with either 4 or 8 radials out from it. And it works rather well, actually. I made some good contacts on it, considering the radio conditions at the moment. And that was one of my projects. I've documented it up on dd5lp.com. If anybody's interested, just look under the equipment tab and you'll find it. And another one up there is a very simple thing that I actually managed to do in one day. This, if you're trying to use car mobile HF whips portable, one problem you do get with them, especially the ones with long elements on them, is that how do you carry them up there? Putting it into the rucksack, it sticks out the top and it can easily catch on things or people. So I'm not too happy about that. But what I've actually come up with is you can get these straps that are really meant for carrying fishing rods in tubes. So I got a couple of those for next to nothing from China. And then I went down to the local DIY store a few days ago, got some water pipe and plugs for each end of it, and I've now got a nice little transporting possibility for the whips when I'm carrying them around, so they don't get damaged and nobody else gets damaged in the process. So a bit of safety there. And the last thing coming back, as it seems to be the topic we're all talking about here, remote control. I'm actually playing around with and actually helping the developer test, who was a Romanian, the Pocket RXTX Android remote control app. And, that you can remote control rigs, either web SDRs or remote stations, from your actual Android phone over the internet. And there's actually quite a few nice features he's got in there. And it's been taking a little while to get it to work with my the Zygo X108, which is the Chinese rig that I use for SOTA. But we're getting there, so that's taking up some of my time as well. But sounds like remote control is the flavour of the month. Who's next?
Yeah, well, I think remote control. I did get into that, and I've remote control or can remote control my Ken with TS590 now. So I'm happy with that. So a lot going on. Chris, I'll leave you to last because you and I do lots of things, and I don't want to cover things that you cover on your chat. So you go first, and I'll cover what you didn't do.
Okay, I'll leave some for you then, Martin. So I have been to some SOTA recently, but I think it is now turned a bit chilly, and I've been quite busy at the weekend, so I don't think I've done any SOTA since the last time I was on the podcast. So that's a bit of a shame, but hopefully might get out. But it is starting to get a bit chilly now and a bit wet and horrible here in the UK. But maybe I'll try and do a couple more before the end of the year. I may actually maybe do some perhaps over Christmas, maybe when I'm up north, and try and perhaps some of the northern summits if I get some time. The club project we were doing, the linked dipole kits, I think have gone quite well. I had a report back at the weekend, and one of the guys managed to work the States 20 metres on one of them, so that was pretty good. I think he worked New York, so that was reassuring that the things do work, and they're obviously very pleased about doing that on a fairly cheap aerial. And a little bit of HF, but not a huge amount. Just sort of had time to get on the radio, so I've done a little bit of HF, made a few contacts on that, but not a huge amount. And the bits we've done together, Martin, so we were there, about a very busy weekend, haven't we, actually? We were on HMS Belfast on Saturday, and we're joined by fellow podcast presenter Leslie Butterfield, no less, who was very busy working HF. So we had the special event call sign for the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, GB 100 ARM for the armistice, and Leslie was working that all day, and he worked quite a few stations on that call sign. So he was very busy doing that, and we did the usual thing, talking to lots of members of the public and the usual stuff we do on the ship, which we won't go through again. And then Sunday we had the Cats Bazaar, which is the local rally in South London, which is the Cools and Amateur Transmitting Society's rally, and that was pretty good. We had a club stand there. We also had our own stand there for the podcast, and we met a few folks there, which was good. I made a few purchases. I think some of the other guys did as well. I did take a few things along and ended up bringing more things back with me than I took along, which isn't really the way it's supposed to work. But it was great fun, and so that was it. And Martin, I know you and I were both at those two events over the weekend.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed the Belfast, and we did get young Colin on board as well, didn't we?
Sorry, I should mention that. Colin flew over, didn't he? Sorry, of course, yeah. Colin flew over, didn't he? Well, I think he flew over more for the Cats Bazaar, but we also had him on the Belfast as well. So that was good to see him on there.
Yeah.
And, that was good.
Yeah, and then so we had fun. We had Colin and Leslie on there as extra guests that don't normally turn up with us. The Cats Bazaar, we've run a infomercial or information about us going there because we thoroughly enjoy it, and we were telling you about it. Those people I met there thoroughly that went for the first time thoroughly enjoyed themselves and came out to me and said, yeah, I agree with you, it was worth going. So that was very, very good. I think the attendance numbers were up. I haven't spoken to Andy yet, but normally at the Cats Bazaar I probably know 60% of the people in the room. Maybe not by name, but I know them to nod and chat and say hi and one thing and another. I think I was down to about 40% this time of people I actually knew. So that's why I think it was quite up on normal. I did buy a couple of interesting devices. Say a couple, 3. I bought myself an isolating transformer, which a good one. For the square root of nothing, so I was quite happy with that. I bought a little baby scope. It's a transistorized scope, circa late 70s, early 80s. And I don't really need another scope. I'm going to turn it into a curve tracer for component hunting. Interestingly, I have had the top off it, Chris, and yeah, the guy who put it in has had a bit of a problem with it. It does have a problem. There's a resistor that's burnt out on it, but I think this little bridge rectifier's gone, which is the most likely looking at the circuit. That won't take long to fix. And I bought a shack PC. I wanted a small PC for the shack, so I bought a small shack PC, so I was quite happy with that. And I have also been making, up until this week that is, trying to make a few HF contacts pretty much in the afternoons here. But this week I started a new job, so that's rather put the tin out on that for the moment. But we'll see how it goes. So all in all, I think we've all been very, very busy and having fun with radio. So
I should mention, Moan, sorry, another one. We had Bob Burns do a talk for us as well at the club actually about receivers through the age, and that was a good talk, and he went through a lot of detail on that. So that was another one that I should mention as well, really.
Yeah, Bob Burns is a very informative lecturer. Used to, in one of his roles, he used to design radios for the marine bands, marine radios, and a very knowledgeable guy. He's the sort of guy that takes a Heathkit chassis, rips all the guts out, designs his own radio and builds it back into a Heathkit chassis and makes it look like it is brand new. And woe betide anybody who says to Bob, oh, this homebrew stuff looks a bit rough, because Bob's looks absolutely immaculate. You know, he does the lettering, everything. It's better than manufactured, put it that way. So, anyway, I digress on that one. Listen, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Yeah, cheers, Martin.
Cheers.
Another fun one.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Mr. Martin Rothwell M0SGL.
No problem at all. Fun to be here.
Yeah, I noticed a few times on your video you've been showing me that the cat's been very friendly with you tonight.
Oh, the cat's or Lily's always in here. She, if one of us is up here, she will come and sit with us. And Emma's next door doing some work in her office. So and Lily gets in the way because Emma's doing a lot of paperwork. So she comes in here and she'll sit on my desk and we'll just sit and look at me all evening. So that's fine.
Yeah. One day we ought to get Emma just to come in and say hi, because she does some of our jingles for us. So we ought to get her to say hi one evening.
I'm sure we can do that.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
My pleasure as always.
Yeah, pleasure to have you, Dan. And so we've had some fun tonight. Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP, thanks for joining us, Ed.
Thanks. A good time was had by all.
Yeah, but it's been fun tonight. I've enjoyed it. And last but not least, Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Thanks for joining us, Frank.
Oh, good to be back and enjoyed it very much.
Yeah. Well, we do put the world to rights, so that's been good. Okay, I'll say 73s to you all, and we'll do it again soon. 73s, guys.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Well, now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. Start from news in the UK that Ofcom are saying that they're making more airways available for industry to use without the need of a license after regulations relating to the band between 57 to 71 gigahertz. Following a review of the fixed wireless services published in July, Ofcom has published a draft regulation to extend and enable new license exemption conditions between those two bands. So they say it's going ahead. There's a continuous block of 14 gigahertz of spectrum will be available. This could be used for very high capacity services, including 5G, which is obviously the next generation of broadband services, but also opportunities for new services in other sectors. There's been amendments made to the wireless telegraph regulation, and so these will come into effect on the 27th of November. So we'll pop a link to the document on the ICQPodcast.com website, and you can check out what Ofcom are doing in the UK in relation to that band. Jose Mercado CT1 Bravo Alpha Tango has just been elected as the Vice President of the European Radio Amateur Organisation by its Board of Directors after the resignation of David Foxtrot 1 Sierra X-Ray Charlie before the summer. Jose's extensive experience in the field of amateur radio and associations. Since 2008, he's been the president of the Tulumba Radio Amateur Society, Charlie Sierra 5 Tango Romeo Golf Mike, and is very committed with the EURAO QSL project in Portugal from the beginning. So every success in your new job. Well, now we head over to our feature this episode, which is our visit to the National Radio Centre. Hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys, a bank holiday Sunday, 90 miles from my house, and we're at the National Radio Centre run by the Radio Society of Great Britain up here in Bletchley Park. Being a bank holiday in the UK, you know what I'm going to say. Yes, it's raining, and we will try and get some outside information for you, but yes, it's raining. In the reception area of the National Radio Centre, as you walk in, there's some interesting displays. There's a rolling demonstration running on a computer. There's also a couple of radios that are dotted around from the era of World War II. One that is particularly interesting to me is an ARRL, because I own one. I believe the Collins down on the floor as well. So got the lids off so people can see inside. And hopefully we're going to bring you some more very interesting information as we wander around the National Radio Centre here at Bletchley Park. As you enter the National Radio Centre, there's effectively a one-way system. You enter, and the first thing you see is a video on display, and takes you through radio, what radio actually is, the bit of a history of radio, right from the very early days, right up to modern radio devices like mobile phones. So it's a completely comprehensive video. As we move around into the next part, around the corner, there are a number of static displays, various old radios in perspex boxes, and a bit further along there is a cabinet on the wall that must have something like about 120 valves, or as our American correspondents would call it, tubes in them. Phenomenal. And I suppose if somebody really wanted to have a bit of fun, you could run a competition to see how many valves you could actually identify. I'm going to fail miserably because there are very few that I recognise. But we're moving along. There's some other interesting transceivers in boxes as we move down the corner of the radio centre. We come across some interesting display units that I used to like in the old days when I was at the Science Museum. They're units that allow you to twiddle knobs and see things happen. There's a oscillator here showing how to pick up signal strength, how to tune a signal in, as a bar graph. There's another one showing as you move a tuning circuit, how the frequency changes, and a whole raft of interesting devices as I move down the corridor here, all about radio, oscillators, bandwidth, modulation, antennas, and all those sort of things. So kind of it's an interesting display of how radios actually work. So very worthwhile looking. On the other side of the wall is a spectrum timeline which shows lots of interesting information of the various bands, from all the way down from LF right up to the multi-gigahertz bands, and shows you a few applications that run on it.
We caught up with Simone Wilson, Mike 0 Bravo Oscar X-Ray, who's an RSGB director, who told us about the visitor numbers and the passion behind the people at the National Radio Centre.
It's not stopped the general public actually wandering through, has it? We've had quite a lot of people wander around today.
Oh, we have had a lot of people. The National Radio Centre has become actually one of the go-to places on a visit to Bletchley Park. Of the number of visitors per day, we'd expect anything like 25 to 30% of those visitors to stop into the centre to say hello. We're on reasonably well one of the routes round so they wander past the door and they go, oh, it's nice, and we'll pop in. So yes, we've seen a huge increase, and that is in no part down to it's all down to Martin and his team of volunteers who are so professional in what they do in presenting our hobby to the general public.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, this is not my first visit. This is my third visit to the National Radio Centre. First time we've done it on the podcast, but every time I've come here, the presenters have been very professional, very passionate about our hobby. And if you've got passionate people talking about our hobby in a passionate way, that's certainly engaging for the general public, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. There's so much to talk about. You've got the Fun Cube, which we're demonstrating all the time, and it sort of amazes people that this little tiny plastic box that we give them is the same size as a FunSat, and there's several of these whizzing around, and we can track them from here, and we get all the data from the experiments they're carrying on board. From that to we've got a live we're monitoring FT8 signals all the time. It is actually amazing what is being done here by the volunteer crew.
Martin is the kind of the boss. Coordinator.
Yes, NRC coordinator.
I'd have put you as the boss, but there you go. Martin, what's your call sign? And give us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thanks indeed. The call sign is G0GMB. I've been that for a number of years now, but I did actually start life as G8KGF. I took my license when I was 21 at university, and before that I was an enthusiastic listener, and in fact when I started off I was A7077, going back quite a few years now. So I've been into amateur radio for about 50 years, I should think, and I was introduced by my uncle who lived down in the Harrow area. He was G3 HBR, Brian Hummerstone, and he was the guy that got me interested in amateur radio in the first place.
Now, when we were talking earlier, before we got the gear out, you were telling us that you felt that the bit that everybody knows about with Bletchley Park is the code breaking. But you said that you described it as a triangle, which I thought was quite an interesting way of discussing it, how radio fitted in. So I wonder if you'd tell our listeners how you described it to me.
Yes, certainly. Well, in the reception area of the NRC, we've tried to set up some degree of continuity. If you think that 90% of our visitors come through the door because they've come to Bletchley Park, they're expecting to see something relevant to Bletchley Park. And really, of course, wireless is the key for that, because Bletchley Park, apart from a very short period of time in the war, didn't have any radio stations here. It was all about the decoding the messages, and if there had been wireless stations here, the aerials or the transmissions would have given away the secrecy of the place. So in the reception area, we have a number of Second World War receivers, CR100, AR88, HRO, and we try and set the scene about wireless and the importance of it to Bletchley Park, because if there were no messages or transmissions received, there would have been nothing sent to Bletchley Park to be decoded. And then, having decoded the messages and having analysed the military intelligence, that military intelligence had to be got out to the field, to the commanders, the Allied commanders, to act upon, and that again entailed wireless to get the messages out. So it really was a triage of activity, of which Bletchley Park was obviously the core. It was the breaking of the codes, but without the initial messages and without the ultra intelligence getting out, there would have been nothing happening.
Yeah, and the radio operators, let's be honest about it, the radio operators would have had to have been very accurate on what they were recording, because it was in code, so you couldn't read it. You couldn't say, oh, well, actually that word means this because I've got that character wrong. So if their accuracy had to be paramount, I would suggest.
Yes, indeed. And of course, I wasn't around in the time, but this is what we're hearing. I mean, there were two groups of people who were primarily involved in the reception of the messages that came to Bletchley Park. Initially, there were the military wireless intercept stations, which were manned by military personnel and by GPO staff, and they were predominantly listening for the military traffic in occupied Europe. But then there was this huge worry that there were agents or spies being dropped into Britain who would have been using low-power communication equipment to get that information back to their commanders. And that's where the voluntary interceptors were brought in through Lord Sandhurst, through the RSGB, to become the ears around the country, because if those operators were using 5 to say 20 watts and they were on kind of 5 to 7 megahertz, the ground wave was very limited around there, so they needed multiple operators listening out for enemy transmissions. And these voluntary interceptors, who were initially part of MI8, became MI5 because they were listening internally in the country. But then once they determined that there were no spies left in Britain that had been dropped in, they were then the voluntary interceptors are asked to listen for the Secret Service messages in occupied Europe, and hence became part of MI6, listening externally to the country. And these voluntary interceptors, their core office was based at Hanslope Park, which is now, of course, Hanslope Park, the Diplomatic Wireless Service. So really the work of the voluntary interceptors was the foundation for Hanslope Park as we know it today.
Yeah. Now, just a quickie, and you may not know this, do any of the ex-wireless operators from those years come back and see Bletchley Park and pop in here?
Yes, the answer is yes. There is a reunion of Bletchley Park veterans, whether that is just code breakers or operators or wrens or whatever, I don't really know, but there is a reunion that happens once a year, and there is also a reunion of the voluntary interceptors that happens once a year. To be honest, there are not many of them left now. Bob King is one of the guys, Pete Windle is another, and they come up here each year, and I was at that reunion a couple of months ago. So the numbers of actual VIs has dwindled a lot, but there is an enthusiastic following of sons or daughters who want to continue the involvement of them. So yes, there are reunions here.
It's been a great day for us. Have you got any plans going forward? With anything going to happen here in Bletchley Park?
Well, there's obviously a lot of things that need to be considered. As I mentioned earlier on, I've only been on board since January, and in that time we've tried to make repairs to equipment which has degraded over the years. We've put in a new low frequency aerial, low frequency top band through to 10 meter fan dipole. We're having the tower that supports the stepper IR beam, we're having that renovated with new guy wires and footing improvements. We've added FT8 and some new, we've had an IT refresh with some new PCs. So there's been a lot of kind of bringing things up to speed. Once the house is in full order, then that's the time to think about how we take the NRC forward. And there are some thoughts about the future zone, because that was the future zone 6 years ago when the centre opened, but of course SDR, software defined radio, is now in pretty much everyday use. And that's an area which personally I would like to see changed into an engagement zone. But obviously any changes that happen have to be thought through. The design has to be right. Making it suitable for people with disabled people, to try and make sure that it looks very professional. And also, of course, if we're going to make changes, it's got to be done in a way that's going to last for a number of years. So it's got to be thought through carefully, and that means good design. It means good investment in whatever we decide to put in there. So that's something that's got to be decided by the RSGB board. It's good enough to have concepts, but it's got to be approved by the board before any changes are made.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. And in fairness, this is a great location. The access is great because you're straight in on the floor, so you've got wheelchair access. There's no ramps inside the building, so there's no real excuse why somebody can't come. It is a really good building on this one, and you do well.
Thank you. I mean, this just taking that idea of the future zone and the redevelopment of my ideal there is it becomes an engagement zone, because one of the things I'd like to introduce here is how people can get best involved in the hobby. To be able to display some starter kits, some low-cost radios, some second-hand radios. My saying is a very simple one. If your 17-year-old son just passed his driving test, you wouldn't be taking him to the Lamborghini, the Ferrari or the Aston Martin garage. You'd be taking him down to look at Seats or Ford Focuses or Ford Fiestas or something of that nature. So it's absolutely brilliant that the manufacturers and the major retailers provide us with top-of-the-range kit here, such as the Flex or the Yace 2 FT5000 or the Kenwood TS2000. It's absolutely great that they provide us with top-of-the-range kit, but I think it's imperative that we show how people can get started in the hobby without necessarily spending a fortune.
I was saying to Simone about your current displays in that there are knobs and buttons to push, which is what I remember the Science Museum used to be. But the Science Museum now is just all touchscreen, and that just left me cold. And being able to tune a radio in, I mean, I would guess that a lot of youngsters, people under the age of 20, have never done it because it's all push button or it's all VHF FM transmission in the car. That's pretty much all they've ever done, I would suggest.
Well, I think you're right there, and of course that's an increasing tendency, isn't it? So the fun of tuning and through the crackle and the pop and the whistle and hearing a station that's coming in from the Far East or from the Middle East or South America, I think is really still quite special and helps to capture the imagination of people. And one of the aspects that we've really tried to introduce here is that amateur radio is no longer somebody just sitting in front of a box with a microphone and talking. Now we've got computers, we've got the internet, and we try in the NRC to show that it's an integrated hobby so that it makes it relevant to young people as well. It shows that the computers, the internet is involved, and you start looking at things like DX maps, solar ham, the live feed from the International Space Station, whether it's KST chat. These are all tools that enable the hobby to work and make it so much more seamless in the modern world, I think.
So sitting in the National Radio Centre at the operating desk, I'm with Tony. Tony, what's your call sign?
Golf Zero, Lima Alpha X-Ray.
Right, that's a good one. And Tony's at the moment operating GB3RS, which is the radio station at the National Radio Centre. You're sitting in front of a Flex radio at the moment, but there's some really nice equipment here that you have to play with, Tony.
Yes, it is, and we're very fortunate because a lot of the equipment we have here is either donated or loaned to us on a long-time loan. So we have facilities for the most up-to-date equipment, as well as the antennas outside, etc.
Yeah. So tell us about the antennas outside. I've noticed quite a few out there.
Yes, there's quite an array of antennas on the roof of one of the Bletchley Park buildings. We have a step IR antenna on the roof, which is quite an expensive set, but it also is a very efficient antenna, which works by matching very closely to the resonant frequencies and therefore low SWR. So.
Yeah, that's good. And you've also got some other stations here. I mean, I notice you've got a satellite system here, you've got other bits and pieces, but there's lots of big screens to show who you're working and other bits of information about radio, isn't there?
Yes, that's correct. And I think for the general public that visit Bletchley Park, today, for example, we're expecting 1,500 people to arrive, and the display screens actually display various things like who we're speaking to. We can look at the QRZ site and show the photograph of the person and his location and the equipment that he's using. Yes, you mentioned earlier that we've got many different systems here. We have a data system where we use FT8 to transmit all around the world. And also we've got a very interesting satellite communication with the Fun Cube, which has been going around in space now for about 4 years. It was actually launched 4 years ago, as I say, and switched on from this very radio station. And as the satellite comes over, we're picking up data from space, and more importantly, that's what schools use to download data from space to craft it into science and technology programs.
Yeah, well, I actually own a FunCube dongle for receiving it, and it's a great interesting information, and I think some amateurs probably not aware of it because we use it to receive, but the actual FunCube dashboard gives you all the data and the telemetry data and the messages from space, doesn't it, Tony?
That's right. And when the public come in to see that, and they bring in children into the radio centre, we encourage them to ask their school teacher in science or technology to see if they're actually linked up to this, because it's a fascinating project. I mean, the FunCube itself, most thing that excites people is the FunCube. You could hold it in your hand. It's a 10 centimetre cube, and after launching 4 years ago, it's now in space, travelling at 17,000 miles an hour around the Earth. So it takes about 80 to 90 minutes to go around the world. And the data we receive is in easy form to see in the radio centre and indeed in schools, using the dongle, as you said earlier, yes.
So adding space with amateur radio certainly does bring us into the 21st century real time, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and the question then what comes off that, with all the data communications and the space communications, why do we need shortwave these days? What's the point? And the point is really that throughout the world in recent times we've had many disasters, like the Solomon Islands out of water, the Nepal disaster, and the Christchurch disaster. They had 2 earthquakes there, for example. On the amateur radio HF system, when all systems fail in those countries, can be easily set up by radio amateurs, and people who visited the radio centre in the past have been able to listen in to see the requests to Great Britain and other countries for resources and times of aircraft flights to help them with the support.
Yes, so it's let's say amateur radio and HF and even old technologies like HF still work very well today. And the other reason sometimes why do we do HF, it's a bit like asking a mountaineer why he climbs Everest, because he can.
Because it's there, that's right, absolutely right. And it is very interesting because this is the National Radio Centre for the Radio Society of Great Britain, and the very fact that we are here has its history in another direction, in so much that those radio amateurs during World War II who were skilled in Morse code, those services were precious services in those days and used by the secret intelligence services in this country. And the radio amateurs on a daily basis sent information back to a post office box every night on MS6. If they thought that was of interest, they'd send it into Bletchley Park to be decoded alongside the German battlefield codes, which were picked up by radio stations all around the world run professionally.
Yeah. So, as I say, Bletchley Park's an interesting place. We're covering the National Radio Centre here, but there's lots and lots of other things to see here as well. So, Tony, how long have you been a volunteer here?
Well, first of all, I've been a member of the Radio Society of Great Britain for 40 years now, and I've been a member of the guide. I do a guided tour session around the park as well during the weekdays, but on the weekends I come here, and I've been here since the radio centre opened about 5 years ago.
All right, well, congratulations on 40 years, and looks like you enjoy yourself. You have a big smile on your face, sir.
We certainly do. It's a huge commitment, but we enjoy every minute of it, and we meet so many nice people, and also the younger people that come along. They're very interested in modern technology, and also just to keep the interest up, we also give them a Morse code test and give them a certificate when they've been proficient.
Yeah, I do a similar thing on HMS Belfast, but the Morse certificate is something that's really worth doing, and it involves youngsters, so that's a good one, Tony.
Yes, it does, and we're very happy to see them any day of the week. That's right, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to let you get back to operating, and the room's getting a bit full and noisy, so hopefully you're going to get some more people to talk to.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And just just one last point on the visitors, we're now seeing about 400 visitors on average every day of the week coming into the radio centre at Bletchley Park, as well as the people who are visiting the park for other reasons. But it's very encouraging, and we try to make it interesting to spread our word.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly interesting, Tony, because I've had a look round, and it's certainly very, very interesting. Well worth a visit. So thank you very much.
It was very nice talking to you. Thank you.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed Martin's and my trip to the National Radio Centre there in Bletchley Park in the UK. Certainly, we met some very interesting people there, including Tony, Simone and Martin from the RSGB, and we'd like to thank them for making our attendance at the National Radio Centre very welcoming. As always, with these type of outdoor events, we have done a bit of a YouTube video as well, so you can see what we've done there. So we've got, if you like, the video version of what we've done in the show today, and then we're also going to be releasing a little later on the full interviews with Simone and Martin as well. They're well worth watching the full interviews as well with both Simone and Martin. So check those out on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ICQPodcast. And as always, guys, we'd ask you to consider subscribing to the channel as well and help us raise the numbers there as well. Right, Dad. Moving on to the mailbag here. Mail dropped in from Jane, Mike 0 Juliet November Echo, in relation to the last episode on remote control your amateur radio rig. And she said it was an interesting section on remote control, but a reminder that in the UK, only full license holders can remotely operate a rig over a network connection. Foundation and intermediate licenses are limited to using an RF link with a maximum power of 500 milliwatts in a band covered by their license class. And as she says, with a lovely smiley face, another reason for Colin to upgrade. If I only had £1 for every person who says so. No problems at all there, Jane. We've checked that out, and we pretty much think you're correct on that one. But we will come back and confirm that, I say, in the next episode. But yeah, we think you're probably right there. But it didn't stop me firing up the shack when I was in London last weekend, and I say, checking out all the lovely toys that are in the shack in Dad's rack now. I must admit, Dad, that's a pretty fine shack you've got. You know, we should have taken a photograph of that, of how to have quite a good looking rack in quite a small area.
I haven't totally finished it yet, son. So I'm still trying to work out how to shoehorn so much gear into such a small space, but we're getting there. And yes, Jane, sorry, we were about to check all this out. You're dead right. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. The trouble is that you get in mind of good ideas to do things, and I initially set it up for me and thought, hey, it'd be a good idea for Colin, and I just obviously need to work back. But there's no reason why Colin can't use it on as a receiver and listen in to what's going on. So all things being equal, that's good. I must admit, I did see a YouTube video earlier in the week of an M6 blatantly breaking the 10-watt law on video, and the only reason I know is because I actually have the rig he was showing and making an operation on, and the far end station said, "You're a massive signal for an M6, fine, into Central Europe, but also these rigs don't go below 100 watts, so unless he's modified it extensively, he was massively breaking the licensing condition, which is far worse than I think than operating remote, Colin."
That's the semantics of it, isn't it? As you say. Going back to your rig, though, a second, I just thought to say here, good little tip for people. You were looking for a small PC, small form factor PC, and at the Cats Bazaar rally that we were at last weekend, we picked up a second-hand HP Elite, I think it's Elite Box, I think, if I remember right. I can't remember exactly what the term is now for the HP desktops, but good quality machine. It was probably about 5 years old, but still good quality, i5, 4 gigs of RAM and a hard drive, but running Windows 7. And one of the things we did is we found the upgrade tool that Microsoft were publishing a few years back to upgrade Windows 7 to Windows 10, and was able to still perform that free upgrade. So if you do a Google search for Windows 7 Windows 10 upgrades from Windows 7 sort of thing, you can still find that same tool, download it, and you can actually roll your machines up to Windows 10, which saves you replace them when that goes end of life in January 2020. So just a bit of a tip there that could save you guys quite a bit of money for Microsoft licensing. Right, well, let's do our thanks here. As always, guys, we'd like you to check out the website, ICQPodcast.com, for all the links and information from this show. Also, for all the news that's going to be published on the website in the next 2 weeks until our next show. As always, our Facebook group is available to you as well, along with our Twitter feeds, at Colin Butler and at M1MRB, and also our LinkedIn profiles as well. You're more than welcome to check those out as well. We'd like to thank Chris, Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, and Frank, Foxtrot 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, for their participation around table, and of course to Bruce Hyman and our monthly subscription donors for keeping us advert free. That's quite a good run now we're having of one-off donations, guys, so please consider us by visiting icqpodcast.com/donate. As we say, anything you send away is always greatly appreciated. Okay, everything there covered off that, apart from one very, very important thing. Time to put the kettle on and find out chocolate biscuit.
Yeah, will do. Well, your mum's not working this week. She's on holiday, but she's gone to see her sister, so I'll still do the chocolate biscuit and cup of tea for her when she comes in. She won't be long now, so that's a good one.
Perfect, no problem at all. Well, guys, hope you enjoyed the show. Let us know your feedback, and we'll catch you again in a fortnight's time. 73 is all.
Yeah, 73.